Director of Interfaith Paths to Peace, and this is the launch of a new series called One River, Many Wells. We're going to be exploring the many beautiful and different religious traditions in Louisville, Kentucky. We'll do sharing some information about them, teach us about the religion, but the most exciting part is we will actually be listening to and hearing from some of the folks that practice that religion in our community. And so I hope you'll join us every third Monday of the month, where we'll be exploring different religious traditions and communities. In July, we'll be looking at our Hindu tradition. So I hope you'll put that on your calendar and come back. I want to give a big shout out today. We're going to be looking at the Baha'i tradition. And I was so excited when I was thinking about this series to launch with an exploration of the Baha'i community. I have just fell in love with that community here in Louisville. And the more I've gotten to know about this religion, the more excited I get. And so I've had a great time researching and looking at the Baha'i community. And so I really want to welcome you to what I think will be one of the most fascinating world religions you may not know a lot about. And the beauty is we have a really wonderful community that's practicing that here in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I want to welcome them, the Baha'i community of Louisville, and they will share some more information about their community at the end. If you want to find out when and where they gather, we'll share some of that information. So thanks for being on the call. Again, Interfaith Paths to Peace is deeply committed to creating interfaith, interspiritual understanding and connection. Louisville is blessed to be, I think, a spiritual mecca, actually, in the United States, with just fascinating and really deep religious and spiritual traditions, communities, and individuals. And so join us as together we try to create understanding, and not only understanding, but how can we collaborate together to create a more peaceful and just world. So thanks for joining Interfaith Paths to Peace and One River, Many Wells. We have several members of the Baha'i community, Dr. Cyrus Puna Gahasi. I'm just saying that wrong, Puna, even after I'm
fine. You're
after I mentioned it. And Jason Heiner. They, the Baha'i community has been doing a devotional every Saturday, and so we've been working a lot with them with Interfaith Paths to Peace, and I'm so delighted to have them on. The way in which we're going to go through this is I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cyrus. He's going to kind of give us some introduction to the Baha'i community, and Puna and Jason will also come in and share some different slides and information. Those of you that are joining us on Facebook Live, I hope you'll have some questions that you can put in the comment. And then those of the ton of folks that are on Zoom, you're welcome to join in as well and ask some questions as we get going. So Dr. Cyrus, I want to give you a big shout out. Thanks for all of your leadership. Thanks for Dr. Cyrus is on the board of Interfaith Paths to Peace and a great supporter of interfaith work. So Dr. Cyrus, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we've got some slides here that we're going to show, and we'll get started. Thank you for being on, and tell us some about the Baha'i tradition. And we've got the slides that we can pull up here as well. Thank you, Dr. Cyrus, and I'll turn it over to you. I think we've still got you on mute there, Dr. Cyrus. There we go.
Okay. My slides presentation starts with, yeah, a little bit far. This is the, no, there you go. Yes. So it is an honor and pleasure for myself, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of Puna and Jason, to have the honor of sharing the teachings and the history of the Baha'i faith. Baha'i faith is the youngest of all world independent religions. It began in Iran in 1863, and now the adherence of it is in every part of the world. In fact, based on Encyclopedia Britannica, is the second most widely spread religion on the planet. So during this presentation, the quotes that I'm referring to are from either Baha'u'llah, the founder of the faith, and or Abdul Baha and some other Baha'i institutions, and of course the beloved Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, that I will refer to when we talk about the governance of the faith. This religion came, it's not an offshoot of Islam. It is basically a logical step following the teachings of Islam, in the same way that Christianity came after from and grew from Judaism. So the teachings of the faith are very revolutionary for a lot of people. For one thing, independent investigation of truth, meaning that every individual has been given the wisdom and the faculties and talents to understand, to read, and to decide for himself or herself. And therefore, we cannot see through the eyes of others. We need to see through the eyes of our own, both physical and emotional and mental, and not be the blind followers. And when you really think about that, many of the problems that we have today, that humanity is being a victim to it, is because of blindly following someone who himself is lost. I didn't say herself because majority of the time it is himself. So therefore, we are endowed with faculties and a vision that can understand the realities, and as a result, the next teaching of the faith is oneness of, we believe that there is only one God. Out of his mercy, he is sending us religions who appear to us in the form of messengers, or in Baha'i terminology, are manifestations, because God, being an unknowable and invisible power, the only way we can relate to him, and he relates to us, is through manifestations or messengers of God. So in reality, we believe in the one religion, in the same way that we all believe in the same educational system, in one school. This school has different grades, and they have different teachers. In fact, Baha'u'llah talks about the unity, the station of unity of all messengers of God, and a station of distinction. The station of unity means that all of them teach the same spiritual realities, meaning to be truthful, to be honest, to be compassionate, to be loving, do not kill, do not steal. These are all eternal verities that every messenger of God has taught us. However, as Baha'u'llah says, God's purpose in sending his prophets unto man is twofold. The first is to liberate the children of man from the darkness of ignorance and guide them to the light of true understanding. The second is to ensure peace and tranquility of mankind and provide all the means by which it can be established. That is the station of distinction. that for every stage of collective life of humanity, God sends us different teachings. And the teachings of Baha'u'llah, we believe, is for today. That is that we are all one human family. I don't think it had this oneness of humanity has ever been any more relevant now than it hasn't been in the past. So we're all children of the same creator. In fact, we all, our ancestry, all the ways, millions of years ago, goes back to Africa. And then, of course, as a result of migration to different parts of the world, based on the response to the nature, temperature, sunlight, we turn different shapes and forms and colors. So, but we're all one human family, and this understandings can solve so many problems. Can we go to the next slide? So, one of the major and very difficult barriers to embrace the oneness of humanity is prejudice. Prejudice is essentially a disease that allows a human being to feel superior and better to another human being. The fact, Abdul Baha says, the fact that imagine ourselves to be right and everybody else wrong is the greatest of all obstacles towards path towards unity. I will come to this a little bit later when I talk about the governance of the Baha'i community, and that is the power of consultation, to hear each other out, to understand the other people's point of view. Now, equality of men and women is something that, again, is something very new, because in the previous religions, women did not have the equality and the privileges that men enjoyed from. But now, if you see this, the white girl and a black boy are reading together, there is a bird flying. And that's the analogy that Abdul Baha has used frequently, saying that the bird of humanity will fly only when the two wings are strong, and those wings are the wings of men and wings of women. In fact, Abdul Baha goes as far as to saying that if that is actually about the importance of education, that every child must be educated on the face of the planet, and it is the job of the governmental institutions. However, if a means of the family is so limited that they can only send one child to school, the girl gets the precedence over the boy, because Abdul Baha says she will be raising the next generation of humanity. So one of the best ways to overcome prejudice and all these isms is education. Not only scholastic and scientific education, but spiritual education. In order to facilitate communication between the members of human race, we need to have an auxiliary language that will be taught in the entire planet, in addition to the mother tongue. So I don't know how many of you can read what is down here about shalom or salam or peace in 6 different languages, but they all look different. Next one. Okay. So the science and religion are 2 very important forces that should be at the disposal of humanity in order to achieve peace. Remember the same analogy and metaphor of bird? Science is one wing of the bird and the religion of the other. So the two of them must work together, not against each other, must be in conformity and cooperation with each other. And one is representing the brain, the other one is representing the heart. The heart and mind has to be for us to be a balanced human being, we need to have a heart and mind in one place. So the promise of world peace is something that has been given to humanity at least for the 6,000 years of its recorded history. And we believe that the teachings of Baha'u'llah are the tools that is been given to us with a blueprint of building the peace and prosperity and well-being because of establishing unity of human race and human family. So that is the conclusion of my first part of presentation, and this is the words of Baha'u'llah saying the world is one country and mankind its citizens.
Thank you, Dr. Cyrus. Again, I think we'll have some more conversation and questions about some of those slides. So those of you that are watching on Facebook and those are on Zoom, welcome again to One River, Many Wells, and the exploration of Louisville's religious traditions. And today we're looking at the Baha'i faith with the Baha'i community of Louisville. So thanks for joining us. Puna, I want to turn it over to you, and you've got some other slides to continue our education about the Baha'i faith. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Cyrus. I also wanted to thank again Interfaith Paths to Peace for inviting us here. I've enjoyed participating in all your programs, and it's an honor for me to be here. I am going to be speaking just very briefly about the practices of worship and prayer in the Baha'i faith, and also talking again very briefly about some of our holy days and ceremonies. And trying to keep sort of in this theme, sort of one river, many wells. I know, Judd, you had kind of asked for us to talk as well from our own personal perspective. So I'll be adding that throughout the presentation so you all can maybe learn more about why these particular concepts relating to prayer, worship, holy days are significant to me. So do you see the, I think you see the slide here, hopefully prayer as, someone's giving me a chat here. Okay. So prayer as spiritual nourishment from God. So essentially in the Baha'i faith, prayer is a form of communing with God. It's how we receive love from God, and essentially it's the main source of spiritual nourishment for our soul. So today I wanted to share with you how this concept of prayer is significant to me and why I'm attracted to this sort of Baha'i concept of prayer. So kind of before I move on, I thought it would be good for me to maybe share with you all a quote that speaks to me about the importance of prayer and the relationship between prayer, God, and the individual. So in this slide here, and let me just make sure it's up here. One second. Give me a thumbs up if you all are seeing O Son of Being so I can see y'all's faces. Do you see that? Awesome. Okay, great. So excellent. So the first quote here is, O Son of Being, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant. So this quote essentially is a quote from Baha'u'llah that really summarizes the Baha'i approach to prayer. You know, that we need to actually reach out to God, and one way doing that is actually through prayer. In order for us to show, you know, our love to God, we need to kind of take that first step, and that first step is prayer. And otherwise God's love can actually not reach us. So we have to take that first step, which is very much kind of, I think Dr. Cyrus spoke about that independent investigation, that individual initiative aspect, and that even reaches out to prayer, that we kind of need to take that first step. We need to reach out to God. We need to call on him, pray to him so that we can get his divine assistance. The second quote that I've chosen here speaks to sort of the purpose really behind the prayer is not only communion with God, but really the development, the character development within ourselves, these spiritual virtues that we need to be developing in order to be able to manifest the principles that Dr. Cyrus talked about so eloquently in his introduction. So this quote essentially talks about the fact that the Baha'i faith, one of the chief characteristics of the Baha'i faith is acquisition of spiritual virtues and powers, and that it's the soul of man which has to be fed, and that this spiritual nourishment is essentially through prayer. So that second quote kind of takes that one layer deeper and talks about the fact that the prayer is essential for the development of spiritual qualities, kindliness, righteousness, justice. So we need to kind of pray for our soul, just like our physical being needs nourishment, our soul needs that nourishment too. So we are very fortunate as Baha'is that we have prayers that were revealed by the Bab, who is the forerunner prophet of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah, who's the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, and then his son Abdul Baha. So those prayers we are actually from the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha, and those prayers are often on different topics and different themes, but we're fortunate enough to have prayers that were revealed by them. So I wanted to take this like one step further and talk to you more really about why the concept of prayer is significant to me, particularly in the Baha'i faith. And it's really this unique aspect in the Baha'i faith about prayer and action. So prayer and action are done together. So prayer is not just done in isolation. So I wanted to read this quote. I think it really speaks to that concept of prayer and action. It is not sufficient to pray diligently for guidance, but this prayer must be followed by meditation as to the best methods of action, and then action itself. Even if the action should not immediately produce results or perhaps not be entirely correct, that does not make so much difference, because prayers can only be answered through action. And if someone's action is wrong, God can use that method of showing the pathway which is right. So you can see from this quote that prayers essentially must be followed by action. And I think what's interesting for me is sometimes we may feel that a particular outcome or think that something may be the best for us. But this quote essentially says that as long as we pray and that we put our best foot forward in terms of action, that outcome will essentially lead to the right path for us. So I kind of share the story with my son, and you all may know he's about to start high school. I'm sure I'm going to share it with the two small ones, which is, you know, the story of the student who prays and prays and prays all night and doesn't study at all, and the next day obviously doesn't even make any progress and fails his test. So essentially here, I think God is telling us, you know, pray and put your best foot forward in terms of action, and your, you know, actions will be blessed. So finally, just to kind of close this concept of, you know, prayer, initially I talked about the fact that it's a primary communion with God. It's a way for us to cultivate these gems and these virtues within ourselves. And then we need to, you know, follow that with action. And then in the Baha'i faith, it goes even, you know, further, where it says that, you know, your actions can actually be, you know, prayers in and of themselves. So I'll read just the very first part of this quote, which is, strive that your actions day by day may be beautiful prayers. Turn towards God and seek always to do that which is right and noble. So this quote essentially says, you know, even your actions, if it's done with a pure motive and it's done with, you know, nobility, then it in and of itself is prayer and communion with God. This is very important to me because my confirmation in the Baha'i faith is because the essence of everything that we do is a service to mankind. And you can even see this through this concept of prayer that seems something that's so individual based and isolated, but it opens up the fact that, you know, through our prayers, we can actually be, you know, serving God, serving mankind. So there's a connection there. So I wanted to share that with you, that, you know, prayer is communion with God, but it's taken even further in the Baha'i faith. There's an action element. And then there's also this concept that, you know, if it's done in the right spirit, service is also prayer as well. So I'm going to now move on from prayer. These topics are all interconnected, but and I want to speak to the topics that Interfaith Path to Peace asked us to speak on. So I'm going to move now to the Baha'i holy days. So switching to the Baha'i holy days. So Baha'i holy days and ceremonies, essentially. So with respect to holy days, Baha'is have 9 holy days that are celebrated, and those are listed here. These special days are associated with significant events in the lives of Baha'u'llah, who, as Dr. Cyrus mentioned, is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, and the Bab, who's the herald of the Baha'i faith. So these are the 9 holy days here. And, you know, Baha'is request to be excused from work and school on those days. With respect to how these are celebrated, and I'm going to talk about this more when I talk about Baha'i ceremonies, but there's really not a uniform way in which a community or a group or an individual celebrates these holy days. And there's really a reason behind that. It's again because of that underlying concepts and that principle in the Baha'i faith of unity in diversity. We're not looking for uniformity. We're not looking for one specific way to celebrate. And that way we can take in the local flair of that community into our celebration. So if you were to ask me also if one of these holy days was more significant than another to me, I really couldn't answer that question because all of these have a unique significance. They are celebrated obviously in different ways given the nature of what that celebration is, but there is no one particular way to do that, and there is a lot of flexibility given that we are looking to integrate the culture of the community in our worship and our services. So my final topic that I'm going to talk about is Baha'i ceremonies. I had to think about this a little bit because there really isn't a significant amount of ceremonies or rituals per se in the Baha'i faith, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So personally, though, what I am drawn to in the Baha'i faith with respect to ceremonies and just celebrations in general is the simplicity. So there's 2 main ceremonies that are listed here: marriage, and funerals. And essentially I've chosen a few just key words that maybe you can sort of take home with you. I actually oftentimes have people ask me, what kind of rituals do you have? What kind of ceremonies? How do you celebrate the holy days? And I wanted to just emphasize these key terms of, utmost simplicity, flexibility, and extremely simple. And there is really a reason behind that. Baha'u'llah, again, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, he really wanted to discourage the Baha'is from creating any kind of rituals with the fear that may actually define the group. So really, in the Baha'i faith, we're trying to focus more on the spiritual teachings themselves rather than the mechanics of how those are practiced or getting into kind of routines on how they are practiced. So to give you an example, in a Baha'i marriage, there is one small verse that the couple says, and then the emphasis is really placed on the union of these 2 families together and the union of their families and the more underlying spiritual elements. I wanted to also talk just finally and very just briefly about just Baha'i prayer, celebrations, devotions, holy days, sort of capturing it all in one just brief statement here as I close. But Again, the flexibility here is sort of intentional, and it bears significance for me because it promotes that teaching of the oneness of humanity and unity and diversity rather than uniformity. I encourage each of you to attend our devotionals and our other gatherings so you can see it in practice. So I grew up in Wodonga, which is a small rural town in Australia. And if you were to have seen maybe some activities that we had there, we do have Indigenous Aboriginal friends who would participate. You would see them, you know, playing music, playing didgeridoo, you know, you would see that. And then when I moved here to Nashville, Tennessee, was where I first lived. And for 10 years there, you will hear gospel music, you know, you will hear, and again, you know, this kind of, and in Louisville, it also has a different and unique feel, but essentially in all forms of worship, celebration, holy days, even in our marriage ceremonies, essentially we're all looking to promote that sense of unity and harmony and unity and diversity. So there's not one uniform way of doing it. We appreciate the diversity, and we are promoting it. So I hope that that was helpful. And if anyone is interested in attending any of our events, I'm going to I also serve as the secretary of our administration, local administration here in Louisville, and I'm happy to send you any information about our events, and I will put my email in the chat box. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Puna. It's really helpful. I've got a few questions, but I'll save those till after Jason, because I think that there's a lot of interest in what you're talking about, the ways in which you practice. But Jason, I want to thank you. You've been such a great help in the devotionals that the Baha'i community puts on. So I'll turn it over to you for the other part of the presentation.
Thank you, Judd. And I'll try to keep my part concise so that we can get to the questions that people have. So I will share that I was not born into the Baha'i faith. I became a Baha'i when I was 19, which was quite a long time ago actually now, but longer than I was not a Baha'i. But the thing that really attracted me to the Baha'i faith, and I grew up from in a Catholic background in Catholicism, was very happy being a Catholic, and there's often this idea of religious conversion, and I never actually considered myself a religious convert. When I became a Baha'i, I never felt like I was leaving anything behind. I didn't feel like I was stopping being one thing and starting being another. And it's really based on, I came to believe this quote from Baha'u'llah, which is that this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. Baha'u'llah says, Baha'u'llah has this very interesting perspective to help us understand history, you know, from my point of view, which is that all of these religions of the past, you know, you can see the eternal parts of them that connect them all, and that they have been given to different people at different times and different places. But the fundamental spiritual truths that connect them all are clear. And what has changed over time and geography and those kinds of things that separate them is humans' understanding of religion. And so this view of history was very inspiring to me. It helped me understand how there could be very faithful, very sincere people of different religions that existed in different parts of the world that very much were equal in the sight of God, but had a different teaching that they grew up with, and a different teacher that they looked to. And so that was really why I became a Baha'i. And then the thing that I've learned the most really since I've become a Baha'i in the 27 years since then is this idea of Baha'u'llah that, you know, the reason that his whole mission for coming is that humanity, and he was saying this in the mid-1800s, that the next stage of humanity was the unification of all the peoples in the world in one common fellowship. For us to not only tolerate our differences, but to appreciate them, to realize those things that, are different about us from a cultural standpoint, racial standpoint. Those are things that are beautiful, and they add power and value to our perspective. And so this idea of let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self or to your own community or to your own nation, but your highest, not that those things aren't important and valuable, but the highest loyalty, of humanity in this age needs to be to the security and well-being of the entire world. So those are the things that that brought me to the Baha'i faith. And since I am also new to the Baha'i faith, I thought I'd share this pronunciation guide. This is one of the biggest questions that sometimes we get when people are first learning about the Baha'i faith. So how do you pronounce Baha'i? And technically it's an Arabic word that means glory. Baha means glory, but it's glory in the sense of light or radiance. And a Baha'i is a follower of Baha'u'llah, but Baha'i or just Baha'i. And then Baha'u'llah, which is sometimes the hardest ones people have saying when they first learn, is Baha'u'llah. So Baha'u'llah. Sometimes people get caught on the U as trying to make a U sound versus it's more of an O sound in the middle there. And then the Bab is a little bit more straightforward. And then you heard us talk about when Pune mentioned the holy days, and we'll talk about this in just a second. Rizvan, that's a word that we'll talk more about. That's an example of when you hear Baha'is say a good deal. And Rizvan is a word that means paradise. We'll talk about why that is interesting and important in just a second. But the history of the Baha'i faith, I'll give you the quick synopsis of it, which is in 1844, the Bab declared his mission. And one of the interesting things about the Baha'i faith that's really fascinating to me, a lot of religions date their beginning to when the prophet themselves received their revelation. Right? So when Jesus, or in a case of Christianity, in some cases, it's really the birth of Jesus. But Islam is when Muhammad receives his revelation from the Archangel Gabriel, which is a beautiful story. Same thing with Moses when he really gets his revelation. That's the beginning of a very important part of Judaism. So the interesting thing about the Baha'i faith, it dates the beginning of the Baha'i faith to when the first believer said, "I believe." And that was May 23rd, 1844, when the Bab declared his mission to a student named Mullah Hussein, a religious student. And the Bab was very much like a John the Baptist kind of figure in the Baha'i faith. He was the forerunner who declared a mission that he was sent for, and that he said was preparing the way for what he said, the promised one of all ages, of all religions. That this was, again, the time of the unification of humanity. And Baha'u'llah in 1863 in the Rizvan Garden along the Tigris River declared that he was that one that was foretold by the Bab. So Rizvan, you see, that's a festival that Baha'is celebrate, which really celebrates the beginning of Baha'u'llah's mission to bring his teachings of unity and peace and justice to the world, and to declare, the next stage of human history. And Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892, and so his son, Abdul Baha, which means servant of Baha, he was the head of the Baha'i faith for the next almost 30 years. And he was a prisoner his entire life until very late in his life because of his beliefs, beliefs like the equality of women and men, beliefs like the oneness of humanity. They were very threatening to many people at the time. and they were afraid that they would spread if too many, the religion and the clergy at the time were afraid of these ideas spreading, honestly. And that's why he was in prison. But when he came out of prison at the end of his life, he actually came and visited Europe and America in 1911 to 1913. So he was in the US for most of 1912 and visited a number of different places here. And he was invited. He spoke to a number of very prominent people at the time, and was sort of proclaimed in the newspapers as this kind of prophet of peace. He was not a prophet. He was, the son of Baha'u'llah and was sharing Baha'u'llah's message, but he was very much beloved by many people at the time for those teachings. And then after he passed away in 1921, his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, he was called the guardian of the Baha'i faith, and he was the one who helped to unify the Baha'is, helped to understand the teachings of Baha'u'llah around how to set up an administrative order and to build the foundations of the religion where there are no clergy. And so there is an administration, an elected administrative order. So, and the concept of consultation is very important. So the taking and reordering sort of community life from the ground up was a lot of what Shoghi Effendi focused his energy on, so that the Baha'is then could essentially move forward in a way that they could be unified. They could have tools to build unity and to build community in a way that every person has the opportunity to have a voice and to have a role in the life of the community. And so in 1863, that sort of went to the next level with the election of the first Universal House of Justice. And that's the international governing body of the Baha'i faith. It's elected every 5 years. Its seat is in Haifa, Israel. And there are other pillars below that there are national spiritual assemblies. So there's a National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, and in about 180 other countries have a national spiritual assembly as well. And then each city, like Louisville, has its own local spiritual assembly. And so, as Pune mentioned, she's the secretary, which is really the public-facing member of the local spiritual assembly that interacts with other faith organizations and community organizations and the public as well. So that's the Baha'i faith, the timeline in a quick capsule, and up to the present day. And I will share just a couple photos. The Shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, is today one of the most visited places in the Middle East, which is a far cry. The Bab, we mentioned his mission started in 1844. He was actually killed by the government and the clergy in 1850 by a firing squad and martyred. And they meant to sort of stamp out his ideas and his religion. But of course, today, now his shrine is one of the most visited places in the Middle East. There are 9 terraces below and 9 above this, so 19 terraces total along Mount Carmel. And pilgrims, not just Baha'is, but people come from all over the world to come and visit these gardens and to offer their prayers or quiet meditations and reflections in the Shrine of the Bab. People of all faiths and all religions in Israel and from around the world. And then across the bay in Akka, Israel, just north of Akka, Israel, is the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, which is, of course, as you would expect, the most sacred, the holiest shrine in the Baha'i world. And it's a place also of prayer and reflection that people, not just Baha'is, come to and enjoy. So that's a quick encapsulation of the history of the Baha'i faith. And and I'll throw it back to Judd to take it from here.
Great, Jason. Thanks so much for that Dr. Cyrus, did you have any kind of closing things that you wanted to talk about before we open it up to folks on the call? You can unmute you there.
You know, I just wanted to, in closing, number one, thank you for really arranging this, but also point out that a little bit of things that I, as listening to Pune and Jason, is that from a Baha'i point of view, God that we know of is a very benign, loving, merciful, generous, and just God. And this administrative order that Jason talks about is essentially the tools that really bring about that sentence that is in many holy words, that the word was made flesh, the words of God that today has been given to us, the institutions of the faith, National Spiritual Assembly, local assembly, all of those things, their function is to bring about that into a reality and basically build that building that is the refuge for the human family.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to open it up now to some questions. So let's have some folks that jump in. I'm sure there's some questions and thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. And I'm sure with our three experts here, one of the questions that I'll just ask real quickly, like give us a sense of like if people were to come now virtually to your worship service, but when you had them in public, like just a quick kind of what would we expect to happen? What's your kind of order? Can you share briefly about that?
Yeah, Pune, you had that section.
Yeah,
Sure, no, I can speak to it. I mean, essentially, you know, in the Baha'i faith, we have no clergy or priests. So essentially our forms of worship and devotions and gathering are all community and individual led. So essentially what you would see is a group of souls somewhat similar to us, but actually we're all very, very different, actually, may I say that. We're all pretty diverse group of people in terms of age, race, and gender. And we would be gathering together at our Baha'i Center, and we would have someone who would, you know, just lead off and would be chairing or helping with organizing the program. We would have readings depending on what the event is. Oftentimes we have readings from various different religious scriptures. Sometimes it's just from the Baha'i faith. And then, you know, we would have time. We always try to have time for reflection. Consultation is a key part of the Baha'i faith, which is allowing every individual to voice their own thoughts and opinion and reflection on writings. And then, you know, we have an opportunity for fellowship. You know, that's a very important part of our community life, is being together. One thing I didn't mention is the arts and is music. That is I think if you will go back and look at some of the devotions that we've done through Interfaith Paths to Peace, you'll see that almost, I would think, all of them have a component of element of the arts, in particular the music, poetry, oftentimes visual arts. And so that, you know, in the Baha'i faith, we have a quote that says, music is a ladder to your soul. So music is really is a key part of our practice. But like I said in my portion, it's really, there's a lot of expression of our prayer and worship is individual based and is based on the life of the community. And just to reiterate again, we don't have priests or clergy, so a lot of it is individual and community led. So it's very much the same as what you see on Zoom, except we don't have, you know, the delicious, you know, food and tea and that, but otherwise it's pretty much the same.
Yeah. Ken, you got a question, jump in.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry, it's not a softball question at all. So I had discovered Baha'i when I was looking up things about office. actors like from The Office, because Rainn Wilson is Baha'i, and so I was like interested in it from that, like learning about it, and I was like, yeah, this is all great, this is awesome. And then I got to the point where it was saying that, so like I agree that gender and sex is an illusion, and I think for the most part, the Baha'i faith and I are on the same page with that, but then we're also not on the same page about queer rights. And I'm just wondering if you guys could give some perspective on that, because I know officially the religion is not in favor of queer marriage. So I would like some perspective on that.
Yeah, I can speak to it briefly. It is it's an important topic, and obviously one that, you know, deserves its own deep discussion. I can say first and foremost, Baha'is do believe in the human rights of every single person on the planet, even people who, you know, think differently about things than us in any way. Also, when it comes to, you know, transgender, you know, Baha'is believe that that's between a physician and their patient. Baha'is have a very high standard of when it comes to, you know, human sexuality and the you know, chastity of conduct and those kinds of things. That's where I think this question comes in. I think the other thing to keep in mind is Baha'is don't, obviously you did mention it, Baha'is believe that the soul, the soul is, has no gender. Every person is created noble and beautiful and in the image of God. And so those things are really, really important foundations of this topic or any topic, you know, involving sexuality. It is true that the Baha'i view of human sexuality is that its purpose is, it's not asceticism, it shouldn't be suppressed, but that it should be, you know, disciplined and channeled, and that the, you know, Baha'i conception of marriage is between, you know, a man and a woman, and in marriage, you know, and that is the ideal and the principle that the Baha'i faith, you know, is based on. So that's the foundation that we believe. But I think maybe the last thing that I'll say about that is also that society today places such a high value around people's identity and sexuality, whereas the Baha'i view is that that's one aspect of your character. We can't judge each other. None of us live up to 100% of whatever the teachings of the Baha'i faith are. You know, we're all striving. And so we also can't judge or demonize each other for the parts of that we ourselves don't live up to. That is a very important aspect of Baha'i belief and sort of the practical application of it. So I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, those are really good conversations. And I would imagine as this understanding of progressive revelation that is so deeply ingrained in the Baha'i community, that the Baha'i community is going to continue to wrestle with that. Although I also know that, you know, there are certain things that are changeable, my understanding is, in the Baha'i community. And then there's certain things where they go back to, if Baha'u'llah, I'm not sure I'm saying his name correctly, said, or prayers, like often the prayers use man, and they can't be changed because that was actually ordained, or that was given to Baha'u'llah, and that can't be changed. So a lot of the texts are not inclusive of gender because it's a literal interpretation of what he had written down. Is that correct? But other things can be changed. Can you bring some clarification to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And that is, you know, as you mentioned earlier, within the religions, there is a progressive revelation. And because the times change for the duration of dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which is about 1,000 years, times will change, and that changes to adapt to the time is the function of the universal house of justice. Imagine in one's human body, the connection between our skull and our pelvic bones. If this was a one straight, strong bone, like a femur, we won't be able to turn around, bend down. So the reason spine is created and there are spaces between the pieces of bone is to give that malleability and flexibility. And that flexibility is the function of the house of justice. The bones are those that has been specified and articulated by
Dr. Cyrus, we may be losing you there. I do want to see if there are a couple of other questions.
in his book
We're about out of time, but
of laws, the Kitab-e-Aqdas. So
are there any other kind of questions as we begin
I think
to
the
close?
complementary
I would like to make a comment. My
actions
name
of
is
these
Joanne
two
Feldman.
Yes.
I see many things that are very like the Roman Catholic Church. The Beatitudes. I mean, that's almost word for word what your beliefs are to our Beatitudes. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks for the comment. Are there other questions, comments?
I had a question. I'm really curious. Thank you, first of all, for the wonderful presentations. I really enjoyed learning about your faith and thinking about it more deeply. I'm very curious how the faith spread so quickly around the world for a rather young global religion, but not having any clerics. I'm curious, was there any kind of a, for lack of a better word, missionary effort, or how did it spread so quickly to so many countries?
Good question. Puna, Dr. Cyrus, Jason had to leave.
I think Dr. Cyrus wants to speak on it. I'll just speak very briefly, though, to your point, Julie. Thanks for asking that question. There was, throughout the history, the short history of the Baha'i faith, there was an emphasis in particular earlier on during the time of Shoghi Effendi, who was explained earlier on in the history of Baha'is actually traveling and spreading out as much as possible throughout the world to spread the message of Baha'u'llah. So to your question about missionary work, perhaps it wasn't missionary per se, but it was more just encouraging the friends to travel to all parts of the world to essentially spread the word of Baha'u'llah. Like, for example, I just mentioned to you guys that I actually grew up in a small rural town, Wodonga, which is actually an Aboriginal word that means bulrushes, which is what you see in a kind of grass in a creek in Australia. But because when, my parents fled from Iran and they landed in Australia, the administration very strongly encouraged us to move to small areas and remote areas so that we can establish communities there. And essentially because to spread the word of Baha'u'llah, which really is uniting mankind, and to setting up structures for the communities through the various educational groups and study circles and classes for youth that we have. And so that's maybe a short version. I know Dr. Cyrus perhaps can expand on that more, but really encouraging. And our family, we've tried to do that ourselves. When we moved from Nashville, we were in Fayetteville, Arkansas for a while, that had a smaller Baha'i community. And then we landed here in Louisville, which is a larger community, but still one that's evolving and growing. So there's just a lot of emphasis on spreading wide, even though, you know, we're the fastest growing religion after, you know, Christianity. We're small in numbers still, but we're definitely widespread. So thank you for that question, and I'll move it to Dr. Cyrus.
Go ahead, Dr. Cyrus.
You basically, Pune mentioned most of it, but these are part of what we were talking about, the administrative order. They're doing this in a very methodical and orchestrated way. One difference between a missionary and the Baha'i pioneering is that the pioneers needed to support and sustain themselves and blend into the life of wherever they were pioneering. So we see children and grandchildren of these pioneers who are multiracial, multinational, multilingual, and that actually is personification of the unity of mankind, the future of human race.
Two of the things that, from a sociological perspective on religion, Julie, one of the things I also think is there's been a lot of persecution of the Baha'i from its tradition. So people really did flee for their lives into different parts of the Persian Empire at that point, but Iraq and Iran, they've also experiencing current day persecution. And I think that keeps them moving. So it's been moving. It's been a moving faith in a lot of geographical kind of areas from its conception, rather than just being grounded in one area, although that was the Persian Empire from which it was started. The second thing that I see that's happening is the Baha'i community is attracting a lot of people that find the exclusivity of the religion they were born in no longer tolerable. And so one of the unique things about the Baha'i religion, in my understanding, it's the first world religion and the only world religion that was started on the principle of unity, and that all other traditions have some perspective that need to be held and honored. So it's not a converting religion in that sense. A lot of people find that they just continue a lot of the deep beliefs that they found from Christianity and even atheism. So there's a really interesting, the integration of science and religion has been done better in the Baha'i tradition than any tradition I know of. In fact, a lot of those traditions, people will leave their faith tradition when they get into an intellectual or rational scientific brain. And the Baha'i community says, bring it. Bring all of that. Bring your scientific rationalism, because if you find that it's rationally true, then the Baha'i community wants to make space for it. And so a lot of the spiritual but not religious are finding that the Baha'i community is a space they can move into that still has a community of practice, which a lot of people that leave organized religion are looking for. And I think the Baha'i tradition is growing because a lot of people that leave traditional religion find that the Baha'i faith is an open space for them. Rita, did you have a comment, question? I'll unmute you. And Rita is one of our Baha'i members as well. Rita, join in the conversation. You're on mute still.
Yes, I'd just like to address the gender issue that was brought up a little bit.
Rita, we're having trouble hearing you. Your voice is really soft.
Oh, hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. I'd just like to address the gender issue a little bit. First of all, I just want to make it clear that we do not, even though God is referred to as he in the writings, God has no gender. It's an impersonal force of love and wisdom and so forth and so on. As far as the prayers, again, although the word he is used a lot, and Dr. Cyrus can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that in the Persian and Arabic languages, which the faith was originally written in, that there's another pronoun that encompasses both, so that in many cases it may be actually referring to both. And lastly, there are actually prayers and writings and so on that are specifically addressed to women, to girls, and to children, so that is inclusive in that way. So I did want to just mention that so that people would not get the wrong impression. And then another thing is, like, when we have our elections for the spiritual assemblies, which only have nine members, whatever level they're on, they have 9 members. It's like there would be a tie between a man and a woman running for the position on the spiritual assembly. It would automatically be given to the woman because, you know, they try to redress some of the inequalities that have been in the past. So I just wanted to mention those points as far as the gender issues go, and that, you know, like I say, God is not, we don't see God as like an old man up there on the throne. It's this impersonal force of love, of oneness, of wisdom, and that's why we have these great teachers or manifestations like Baha'u'llah, so they can reflect that, all those qualities to us on a personal level.
Thank you, Rita. I appreciate
Just
the clarification.
since Rita mentioned that, just let me just add one thing. They when the voting comes to number 9 being tied, it's not just the woman gets it, it's also a minority. If there is a tie between a white and a black person, it is the black person, because of the desire for representation of more of people who have had less opportunities to participate in building the civilization.
We've got time for maybe another couple of questions. If you want to unmute yourself, feel free to ask a question. We have several of the Baha'i community members here on the call. Any other, questions? Anyone on Facebook Live have a question that you'd like to ask? Is there anyone that participates in the Baha'i community, maybe in a minute or two, can say what they really love about the community? Why is it so meaningful and important to them? I would love to hear some other voices just share about why it's so powerful for them. Jenkins, yes, you want to go ahead. We've unmuted you.
When I became a Baha'i back in 1972, I happened to have been in the Air Force and traveled Southeast Asia, traveled Native American nations when I was stationed in Arizona. To Florida and was stationed there.
Jenkins, I'm sorry, we're having trouble hearing you. Your microphone seems to be having some trouble.
Fix it later. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks. Any other comments or questions? Want to make sure we leave space for that.
I'm going to call on some of our other Baha'i friends. I see my mom, my mother-in-law. Come on, I see Venus. These people are wonderful Baha'is who have been so integral to our community. Please share why this community means so much to you.
I want to see Pauletta. Did you all have a question?
Oh.
This is Mari.
Yeah, Mari.
Didn't have a question, but just what was the original attraction? I guess coming out of being completely kind of disconnected most of my life. After going to a few meetings with there's a few people here that I know pretty well, but anyhow, there was just sort of it's a real simple thing. There was just sort of a glow about the people that I was with. It was just a real positive energy. And coming from a real kind of a negative energy kind of background and personality, it was just very comforting. It was the whole concept of attraction, which our little group in Jeffersonville and the Louisville group does very well. So it's very simple, but and it's hard to even put into words because it is a spiritual concept I'm talking about, but it's just hard to explain. But there was a sort of a magnetism that the people had that draws you in, and acceptance. That's it.
Great, thank you. And I would say the same. The several times that I was able to gather with the community before the COVID hit, the community's embrace. There's a couple of things that I was aware of. One is I really like the idea of not having clergy or religious leaders, because then I was an ordained Presbyterian minister, but that was one of the challenges I had with the Christian church. I thought it separated people too much. And it also kept individual members from taking responsibility for the life of the community. And so my sense was all the Baha'i members took responsibility. It was their job to make community happen. And I think that's really powerful. I also love that we went around in a circle. Everybody had a chance to speak. All voices were always included. And I think that's transformative and very important that everyone has a chance to speak rather than the ordained one or the one that's supposed to be speaking. The other thing that I found really powerful was the focus on the education of children into basic values and human rights. The values that were being taught to the children were just amazing. And I think that nurturing of children into the values of the faith, but also in just the values of humanity, the focus on that was just really beautiful. And again, I've only been 3 or 4 times, but those are some of the things that I really love about it.
I'd like to speak about my experience.
Please, Nancy, yes.
I'm a native Louisvillian. I've been a Baha'i for many, many years. And so a lot of this is just who I am. It's what I grew up with. And some years ago in my professional life, I was in an organization and we were in a meeting and I looked around and there was a bunch of middle-class white people, just like me. And I thought, wow, this is really boring, because I was so used to the diversity in the Baha'i community that I was frankly surprised that all these were people just like me and there was no diversity there. So I kind of at that moment, I just really was reminded of how fortunate I am to be a part of this community.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes. We got time for one more comment before we need to close. Would somebody else like to jump in?
Yes, I would like to say something.
Please.
Actually, my name is Malihe. I'm Pune's mom. And
well, thank you. First of all, we take a deep bow to you.
Thank you so much. Well, I've been out of Iran for many years. I was very young when I left Iran. And our family been through a lot of persecution, execution in Iran. And as a Baha'i, when I came, I traveled the world from Scotland to US, to Canada, and to Australia. And every place that I went, I didn't feel lonely because the community of the Baha'i community accepted me. I was, they were as a part of our family. We get together, we say prayers, and we have fun together, and you feel so welcome as a stranger, no matter if you're Baha'i or not really, but that's what I felt when I left home and have no family around. So I think no one in Baha'i community judge each other. We all look the same, as a family. And this has really attracted me. I mean, no matter if you're rich or poor, you're still the same. Love of Baha'u'llah is in your heart. And as Abdul Baha says, if you look at everybody, see me in everybody. So this is something that I think from the young age we learn, and that's why we sort of love everybody. I mean, doesn't matter you're Baha'i or not, but if you come to me for help, I'm there to help you. So, and for me as experience, being a Baha'i did a lot of help when I, moved out of Iran back in 1972, actually. And, I was in Scotland, I had nobody, I had my first child, and my neighbor, it was so nice to me. And she wasn't a Baha'i, it was a couple that really helped me a lot about the year that I was there, to raise my child. So, and I don't know, I think the Baha'i faith is somehow teach the unity among all the people around the world.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that comment and your story. Well, I do want to close. We've got another conversation that's starting at 4:30 on this channel, so which you're welcome to stick around for. It's called Who Will We Become? Looking at how do we move forward as a community in the midst of two pandemics, one racism and the other COVID. So you're welcome to stick around for that conversation. But I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Cyrus, Pune, and also Jason, who had to get off. But you all are a true delight for our community, and I'm so thankful to be able to work with you and your presence in Louisville. I want to invite all of those that are listening. The best thing to do is just check them out. So on Saturdays, they do a devotional, Interfaith Paths to Peace at 9 o'clock, and then Sunday at 11. I believe that's your time. Is that right, Pune, your time is at 11 o'clock on Sundays?
It's at 11 o'clock on Sundays. And actually in the chat, I have left our website that is now always up to date, that has all of the events that we have, both what we have through IPP and then also our services on Sunday. And then we also do have programs for junior youth. And thank you so much for talking about our robust education program. So if you are interested in having any of your children or any of the children in the neighborhood participate in that, please feel free to contact me. I've also put my email in the chat box. And if you don't have it, you can always ask Judd, but I've got it right here. Please feel free to, and a few of you have sent messages to me. I am relatively new to the Louisville area, and I would just like to meet more people and make more friends too. So if you want a friend, like my mom said, there's always a friend here. So please reach out to me.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for your presence in our community. I also wanted to lead with the Baha'i community because I really do believe that evolutionary wise, we are moving into a new understanding of the unity of the human experience, and that we've got to break down these barriers that separate us and keep us from, not that the differences aren't important, and they're beautiful, and we aren't all called to be the same, but we are all called to recognize the deep source from which we come as brothers and sisters on with the planet. So thanks to the Baha'i community and all of you that joined us today, and I hope you'll come back. Every Monday we do a Soul for the City, which we do different programming around cultivating our soul, and then the third Monday is a different religious tradition. So put that on your calendars and come back and see us. May everybody have a blessed day, and may we celebrate our core humanity with each other through celebrating our differences and our similarities. You're welcome to unmute yourself and say goodbye to the growing family.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Peace.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
Thank you all. This
Beautiful
was a
program.
wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
This was so good. Thanks. Nice to meet everybody. Thanks for people from far away joining in too.
Yeah, they were all over the country.
I know.
Good to have everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Send my love to Nika, Rita, Danita, Ida. I need to connect with you. Nice to see you here too.